Well, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Consulate General and the Instituto Camões, I welcome you all to the book presentation and of Jewish Voices from Portugal. Muito boa tarde a todos, bem-vindos. This session, I will speak in English so that all of us can fully understand. We have this important work, Vozes, Judaicas de Portugal, Jewish Voices from Portugal, with the presence of Rabbi Shlomo Pereira, whom I thank beforehand for his kind participation and willingness to present his book and his knowledge. And I would like now to give the word to the Honorable Consul General of Portugal in New York, Dr.ª Fátima Mendes, to give us a few words, and thank you for the support to this initiative.
Boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigada por estarem aqui. Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for joining the Consulate General of Portugal in New York, as well as Instituto Camões, especially responsible for organizing this presentation of the book by Rabbi Shlomo Pereira. For us, is also Professor Alfredo Marvão Pereira. I'll proceed in English. I believe that most of you will feel more comfortable with the English language. I would like to say that the content of this book is mainly not just for scholars, but to all who are interested in culture, in Portugal, and in Jewish culture. You'll see that it's special, it's very challenging. The period that was the object of this research. It was a special period for Portugal, for Portuguese Jews, and you'll see how our history is so multifaceted, and it's so important for us to continue to look towards the future, but not forgetting our roots and all the continuity of our history. And I would like to say that this amazing journey that is our journey as a country, a journey as a population and as a society as well, is mainly rooted in diversity since the beginning of time. And by now, as you know, April is very important for us, is the months of freedom and liberty, where we can search the soul of our country and ourselves as well, and to look towards the future, a common past and a common future, on a perpetual motion. Regarding the person who is today with us and honored us presenting the book, I would like to say that it's someone with special interest in public finance and the economy, and also in development and environmental economy. I should say that the alma mater of our Professor Alfredo Marvão Pereira is both the Universidade Técnica de Lisboa and as well as the University of Stanford, being now a professor at a very important place, the College of Institution, a special institution, the College of Mary, William and Mary in Richmond in Virginia. I should say that someone who wrote a foreword in the book had an amazing sentence that is so important for today's world and for the future. It was the Honorable Mayor of Cascais. He said, "If we stand firm in our beliefs, good will prevail. If we are faithful to our values, intolerance will not win in our streets. If reason and heart guide us, we shall always understand each other. And I believe that this is a magnificent proof of research, this way of understanding each other. And I would like to listen to Shlomo Pereira.
Thank you. So, Josef, I think you had something to say, but so Berkowitz, you have your hand raised. I don't know if you want to ask any question, or the hand is raised just okay. Josef.
I would like to, Josef, please.
Okay, so Dr.ª, good afternoon. So thank you all for being here. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing Professor and Rabbi Shlomo Pereira. And Rabbi Pereira is a native of Lisbon, Portugal, and moved to the United States in 1982. And he received his rabbinical ordination in Jerusalem in 2004 and has served in the last 2 decades as assistant rabbi and education director at Chabad of Virginia. He got his PhD in economics from Stanford University and is better known in Portugal as an economist and by his Portuguese name of Alfredo Marvão Pereira. Rabbi Pereira lived with his wife, Elisheva, in Richmond, Virginia, and they have 5 children and 8 grandchildren who live in the US and in Israel, and who all share a great love for Portugal. His passions, aside from Judaic studies and economics, include history and in particular Portuguese history. Having served frequently as advisor for the Portuguese Ministry of Finance and for the Ministry of the Environment, he made a definite and crucial technical contribution toward the introduction of a carbon tax in Portugal in 2015. He wrote over 120 referred research articles in international journal, and as well as 10 policy-oriented books. He worked on infrastructure investments, was featured in 2015 in the economic report of the President of the USA. He's an author of 2 widely circulated research documents, Adrat Melech, biographical notes on the Jewish sages throughout the centuries, and Chachmei Alacha, an overview of the major works in Jewish law over the last 1500 years. More recently, he wrote together with Rabbi Eli Rosenfeld of Chabad Portugal, Jewish Voices from Portugal, of Book of Sermons on the Torah portion, and Jewish Ethics from Portugal, most recently, the traditional Jewish writings on ethics, also known as Pirkei Avot, both bilingual books based on commentaries of those rabbis who called Portugal home in the 15th century. Today, Rabbi Pereira will be sharing with us his expertise on this topic. Jewish Voices from Portugal focus on the Torah commentaries written by 6 rabbis with direct connections to Portugal. Their books span 2 centuries, from the middle 1400s to the middle 1600s, and were written through tragic historical times and challenging personal circumstances. Their message, however, is universal and highly relevant to our lives today. Paraphrasing the Portugal national anthem, this book truly brings to us the voices of our Portuguese Jewish forefathers, speaking for the myths of memory, of a different memory. And it is to their memory that is dedicated. This book also features a preface by the President of Portuguese Republic, where we can read the following, I'm quoting now. In analyzing the commentaries of the Torah of the rabbis of Portugal from the 15th and 16th centuries, the authors of this work are part of a long tradition of making the book always present and always current, according to the central idea of Judaism, Tikkun Olam, improving the world. It is therefore the universal message of a particular people. End of quote. So with that, I ask you to give full attention to Professor Shlomo Pereira and help me and welcome him to this presentation. Rabbi Pereira, please.
Okay, thank you. The first thought that occurs to my mind is that I'm going to greatly shorten my biography so that it doesn't interfere so much with my speaking time. So, of course, I'm absolutely delighted that all of you are here. Let me just start by making a couple of logistic statements. So all of you are muted, but please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions anytime. You can just unmute yourself, ask questions, you can raise your hand, or you can use the chat. I have a second screen where I can see all of that, so please feel free to interrupt me anytime. Before getting to the topic, and to put a little bit of, to set the stage for our conversation, I want just to follow up on something that the Honorable Consul mentioned, that maybe this was not just a scholarly work, and when we say this, I want to stop and say immediately, this is not essentially, my work is not essentially a scholarly work. It may be scholarly, but that's not the intent. The intent of my work, and Rabbi Eli Rosenfeld, who settled in Portugal about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and is now a Portuguese citizen as well. Our main objective is not academic. Our main objective is cultural, is historical. Our main objective is actually emotional, if you want to put it that way. What we want to do with our work on the sages, on the works of the sages, the lives of the Jewish sages of the late 1400s, 1500s, and so forth, what we want literally is to share with the rest of the Portuguese population, the rest of the Portuguese people, the rest of the people that are interested in the Portuguese and Iberian culture, Jewish or otherwise, we want to share an experience that we believe is very unique, and that's the Portuguese Jewish experience. And what that means is that lots of Portuguese people do not know, most Portuguese people do not know about the uniqueness and the contributions and the love for the country that Portuguese Jews always have, on one hand, and on the other hand, Jews don't know very well either the story of Portuguese Jewry. So our main objective is to bring their lives back to the limelight, to make their voices again sound, to hear their voices again speak to us today. And again, for me and Rabbi Rosenfeld, this is literally a labor of love, that what we want to do is to bring their voices and share their voices with our compatriots. Immediately, and of course anybody else who is interested in Judaism, in history, or in Iberian culture and history. So this is very important to frame things, because although we bring an enormous rigor from a scholastic perspective, and a lot of the things that we are doing are not particularly easy to do for a variety of reasons, that is not the point. As a matter of fact, if you allow me just a specific example of something that happened that illustrates our attitude, okay? When the president of the Portuguese Republic, Sir Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, he was kind enough to write the preface, one of the two prefaces for this book. He wrote something. He wrote something that we actually asked him to remove. Very humbly, we asked him to remove that. He wrote something about the enormous scholarship and merit of the authors, me and Rabbi Rosenfeld. And we asked him, can you please remove that? Because this book is not about us. This book is not about our scholarship at all. This book is about those voices. That's the only thing that we want to be projected, is their voices. I am not in the book. I'm just a vehicle. We don't want to call attention to ourselves. We don't want to call attention to our scholarships. We just want to share their existence, their reality, their views, and bring them back and share them with our compatriots. Okay, this is certainly a much longer introduction than I expected. So let me tell you what I would like to do today. I would like to do basically 4 different things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, Jewish Voices from Portugal. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the rabbis that are featured in the book, their lives and their connection with Portuguese history, and their commentaries. But I feel that it's important to give you a little bit of a historical context. So we'll start with a historical context, then we go a little bit through the book, go a little bit through the histories of the rabbis, and then we'll have some parting thoughts. And I have a question. Somebody has a question. Ikea, please feel free to ask your question. Just unmute yourself, and it is Anna. Anna, so if you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
Yes.
I have a quick question. Eu falo português também. Eu só quero saber, por que é que o povo rabino pensa que agora os judeus portugueses estão voltando para trás para serem judeus, e as pessoas estão a falar mais, estão estudando mais e querem voltar para essa religião que era originada?
I couldn't hear the very beginning of your question. You can ask the question in Portuguese, but just the very beginning I couldn't hear.
Why do you think that Portuguese Jews are returning in such large amounts back to their religion of origin and returning back to their roots?
Yeah, so this is that's a very interesting. It's a very interesting question with many answers. But the most important thing to understand, and we are going to talk a little bit about the background. You know what, Anna? Allow me not to answer this question right now, and let me answer this question in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So let's go through this historical background, historical context, and we'll see clearly the answer to some of these questions. So the historical background of the period that we are talking about is the period of the expulsion of the Jewish population from Spain in 1492, and the expulsion and a few other situations with the Portuguese Jewish community in 1497, and the aftermath of this. So the period that we focus is basically the late 1400s and the period immediately after. So we're talking about rabbis from this period. So I want to share with you a little bit about the history of this period, because, again, it's very important to understand. So the first thing is to share with you the thought that the expulsion from the Jewish population from Spain was a paradigm shift in terms of Judaism in Portugal. The Jewish population in Portugal was very sizable. So the Jewish population in Portugal was already, before the Spanish expulsion, was maybe 7%, 8% of the total population, which is a lot. There were Jewish cities and Jewish settlements in dozens and dozens of Portuguese cities and towns and so forth. But the whole thing mushroomed enormously with the inflow of Spanish refugees. So in 1492, according to the best estimates, there were over 100,000 refugees from Spain, Jewish refugees, that settled in Portugal, which means that the Jewish population of Portugal overnight went from 75,000 or so to 200,000. and 200,000 is 20% of the Portuguese population. So one of the things that it's very difficult to grasp, and I mean, we absolutely have to understand, is the enormous number, the enormous presence, the enormous Jewish presence in Portugal at this stage. This is unique almost by historical standards. I cannot think about any country in the world, aside from Israel, where the Jewish population is more than a couple of percentage points today. It's not just that the numbers are staggering, but also that we have to acknowledge, we have to recognize that the Iberian Peninsula was at the time arguably the center of the Jewish world. Okay? That's where most of the scholarship existed. That's most of the art and the wealth and the intellectual contributions and so forth. So of course there was Jewish settlements in France, in Germany, in other places, but they were not nearly as affluent and nearly as important from an intellectual perspective, from a scientific perspective, from a religious perspective, if you want. So again, the Iberian Peninsula was arguably the center of Judaism at the time in the world. What that means then is that the number of refugees that comes from Spain at that time, that's the cream of the crop of the Spanish Jewry, and therefore literally for a period of 10, 15 years, we have Portugal in the forefront of everything in terms of the Jewish life in the world. And this is the period that we are capturing here, that we are talking about here. Many great rabbis, many great leaders settled now in Portugal, coming from Spain. So again, this is a very important community qualitatively and quantitatively. So with something like this, and of course we understand for those of us of my generation who witness, for example, the return from the former colonies of the Portuguese refugees in the 1970s, right? 1970s, we saw people coming from Africa, and we saw that that was like 5% of the population. And that 5% was already difficult to absorb. So we can have an idea that when you have a very large inflow of people, it creates a lot of antibodies. I mean, that's sort of to be expected. But the big problems, if you want, with the Portuguese Jewish community, they start mostly because of the interaction between the Portuguese and the different Spanish crowns, different Spanish kingdoms. And at the time, essentially, the way you consolidated power was through marriages, through arranged marriages, and the Queen Isabella and King Ferdinando of Spain, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, they were both very much engaged into expanding their presence through all these wedding contracts, through these wedding deals, really. So this is the time, for example, where one of their daughters, Catherine of Aragon, becomes the first wife and also the first victim of Henry VIII in England. Okay, so it's the same time period. It's the same time period where the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire is Charles V, who is related and were married to one of the daughters of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. And so King Emmanuel I from Portugal, he also got into a wedding contract with the Catholic kings of Castile and Aragon, and the most important condition of this contract was the requirement by the Queen Isabella and King Ferdinando that Portugal should get rid of their Jews. So Spain had been cleansed ethnically, if you want, by 1492 with the defeat of the Muslim presence in Granada, and then also in 1492 with the expulsion of the Jews. So it was complete cleanse from an ethnic perspective, and so they wanted Portugal next door to be basically the same. And it's in this context that the crown in Portugal has to get rid of the Jews. Because, of course, the alliance with Spain was absolutely important, so we need to get rid of the Jews. To put things in perspective, the alliance was so important with Spain that the King Emmanuel, as you may or may not know, he married one of the daughters of Isabel and Ferdinando. She died within 1 year, and she married another sister. So, I mean, this really had to happen. They had to unify the two crowns in some way. And for those of us who are familiar with Portuguese history, you will know that this actually ended with a debacle of Portuguese losing independence in 1580. That's because of this wedding contract that created this link between the two crowns, that at some point there was no direct successor of the Portuguese lineage, and the closest was actually the descendants of Isabel and Ferdinando from Castilla. So we lost our independence basically because of this wedding contract. From our perspective, more important than that, is that the Jewish population ended up in a very difficult situation because of this. Now, we have to understand a couple of things, very important, is that although King Emmanuel I, although he had to get rid of the Jews to satisfy the conditions of this marriage alliance, he really did not want, for a variety of reasons, to get rid of the Jews. He needed to keep the Jews, and that's for a very simple reason. This is a period in which the Portuguese are starting all the incredible work of maritime explorations. It's the period when eventually you're talking about the year when Vasco da Gama leaves and finds the way to India. So this is a critical period where Portugal is engaging already in an incredibly expensive and incredibly complex, from a scientific perspective, process of maritime explorations. And the Jewish population was right there on top, helping with this process. The idea of the maritime exploits, it's very difficult to think about the maritime exploits without thinking about the huge financial backing, for example, of the Abravanel family. Abravanel family is a very noble Portuguese Jewish family with branches all over the place, Spain at the time, Portugal, and so forth. And there was major financing on their part of these exploits. And incidentally, the Abravanel family, they were also financing in their own way, in a different way, but they were also financing a good part of the Christopher Columbus expeditions for the Kingdom of Castilla when they discovered America and all those types of things. So financially, there was an enormous dependence on the Jewish population, but maybe more importantly, a lot, of course not all, but a lot of the intellectual pursuits that were behind the exploits at the time, the maritime exploits, these are people that were Jewish. We may not realize that, meaning we Portuguese in general may not realize that. But the chief astronomer of King Emmanuel, the chief astronomer was Avram Zacuto. Avram Zacuto was a rabbi in Lisbon. Okay, he is the chief astronomer. We have documents in the Dr.ª, that is the National Archives in Portugal, with the appointment of the rabbi as the chief astronomer, as the king giving payments to him for his services. We have actually even documents where the king signs and Rabbi Avraham Zacuto signs below in Hebrew, his name in Hebrew, as the mathematician of the crown. And Rabbi Zacuto is someone who actually, he developed an enormous number of maritime charts that were used well into the late 1500s. So basically after 100 years after the expulsion, those charts were being still used by the Portuguese navigators. We are talking about the development of the equivalent at that time of the GPS, that is the astrolabe. The maritime astrolabe was invented by Rabbi Zacuto, that allowed the navigation in high seas where you don't have the land to guide yourself. You have to guide yourself by the stars. So you need an instrument and you need charts of all the stars and lunar and solar events to guide yourself. And the Almanac Perpetuum is one of the books that was written, one of the first books printed in Portugal, in Leiria, in the 1495, again, one of the first books. And this is a book where he presents all of that, and again, has been used extensively, not just in Portugal, but ever since. Just to give you an idea, and so that you don't think that I'm exaggerating, because it's very easy to just think that I'm looking at something and making it into something that it isn't. Okay, Rabbi Avraham Zacuto, his contributions are so important, they are so decisive, that if you look, for example, at the writings of Damião de Góis, a great chronicle, he refers to Avraham Zacuto all the time. As a matter of fact, according to Damião de Góis, for those of us who are familiar with those writings, he sort of argues that the old man of Restelo, that is a big sort of tale in the Portuguese history, that Vasco da Gama was being advised by the old man of Restelo. Damião de Góis seems to imply that that was Rabbi Avraham Zacuto. And we have some paintings of the time right here where we have the king being presenting Vasco da Gama with the standards that he's going to put in wherever he's going to land. And here is Rabbi Zacuto with his tables, the Almanac Perpetuum, the documents that are going to guide. So, and again, as I'm saying, just finishing this idea that, so that you know that I'm not overstating my point, the Rabbi Avraham Zacuto, to the best of my understanding, is the only rabbi, certainly the only Portuguese rabbi, that has a crater in the moon that is named after him. Okay, NASA has named, in the early 1900s, they named the crater in the moon as the Zacuto crater, in honor to the contributions of Rabbi Avraham Zacuto as an astronomer. That's how important it was. So what am I saying? What am I saying is that the Portuguese crown wanted to get rid of the Jews. They had to get rid of the Jews, and at the same time wanted to keep them for all these reasons. So the whole process was a process of essentially, what is the only way to get rid of Jews and at the same time keep them? The solution is to convert them by force. So there are three acts through which the Jewish population is massively converted by force. There is a first wave around the end of 1496. In the middle of 1497, there is another around Passover, Easter time. And then you have a final event towards October of 1497 with a massive conversion in downtown Lisbon. So we have an enormous pressure and an unbearable pressure forcing people to convert, forcing Jews to convert, and creating the phenomenon of the new Christians. But this is not a small number of people. This is a massive number of people. It's not just a massive number of people. It's the cream of the crop of European Jewry. And it's the cream of the crop of intellectuals and financiers and so forth. So the first point that is unique about the Portuguese solution, if you want, of the Jewish problem is, although there is a decree of expulsion, in fact, nobody was expelled. Quite the opposite. People were converted by force, and they were forced to remain in the country. They were forbidden to leave the country. Makes sense, because the whole point is not to lose the Jewish population. The king did not want to expel them, want to keep them. So, of course, you're prohibited from leaving the country. On the other hand, because it was fully clear, it was absolutely clear that these new Christians, they did not know anything about Christianity. And all they wanted to be Jewish. It was given to them successive periods, large periods of time to adjust to the new religion. This is what I call in modern parlance several periods of don't ask, don't tell. So you can, I mean, you still have to go to church, but you can do your Jewish things because obviously you don't know anything about Christianity. So just let's learn. And in the meantime, we want you to be happy enough so that you can contribute with your money and your intellectual contributions for everything that's going on. And we have very important people that immediately, after being converted, were co-opted. We know some of them, for example, even adopted the names of some of their sponsors. There are some Gamas in the Vasco da Gama expedition that are not related to Vasco da Gama, but they were sponsored, sort of. They are new Christians. Anyway, so listen to this. What we have in the Portuguese case is forced conversion, not expulsion, massive forced conversion. Portuguese Jews, new Christians now, were given a period of 20 years to adjust, and they were forbidden to leave the country. This is very unique. This is very unique, and this gives the historical answer for what Anna was asking before, is that Portuguese Jews did not convert willingly. Portuguese Jews had an opportunity for 20 years and then more to develop the whole array of alternative rituals, survival rituals, that as time went by, they looked less and less Jewish, but that's what they could do. So you have something very unique that in the Portuguese case, you have communities all the way to the early 1900s that have close links, family links, ritual links, cultural links to this period. You don't find that in any other place in the world. You find many places that are descendants vaguely of the new Christians and things like that. But communities that can trace their lineage directly, it's only in Portugal that you have that. You have that in the early 1920s with the first revival of the Portuguese Morenos, as if it were, and then in the 1980s, again with a revival that's much smaller, that's when the Jewish community in Belmont was formed and things like that. So the Portuguese case is very unique, and the point is, again, people were converted by force, they were not converted willingly, and they could develop survival mechanisms throughout time that allow them to keep a certain level of traditions for a long time. Now, of course, the end of everything, and this is sort of where we stop this historical introduction, the end of all illusions is due with the Lisbon massacre of April 19th, the so-called Easter massacre, because this was in Easter, on Easter Sunday, in Lisbon, and there were about 6,000 Jews that were killed at that time. And we really don't need to talk about too much about that, but it's enough to say that, again, this was the end of the illusions that things could be in any way recovered. And the legislation was constant, again, giving some permission for people to continue doing their own thing, but also forbidden people from leaving Portugal, and basically the culmination of everything, and this is exactly where we stop this historical discussion. The end of everything, absolutely, is when the Portuguese Inquisition is established in 1532. Okay, so that's pretty much. So what happens after that? After that, you have a beautiful and incredible diaspora with Portuguese people going all over the world, Portuguese Jews and Spanish Jews that were in Portugal, going all over the world. And I'm doing a lot of work now with Rabbi Eli to uncover a lot of the writings that they have from the time, that they tell stories of what is happening and their trips when they are fleeing from Portugal to Italy and then the Ottoman Empire, and I'll mention a couple of those things. But so there is a lot of that is written, but it's written in Hebrew, so we are just now starting to uncover that. So there is the Portuguese Jewish diaspora that takes the name of Portugal and takes technology and takes everything to places like the Ottoman Empire. Just to give you an idea of the contribution of the Portuguese diaspora, the printing press was introduced in the Ottoman Empire by Portuguese refugees. The printing press, okay, and then eventually, in the beginning, the Portuguese diaspora in the early 1500s is mostly to Italy and to the Ottoman Empire, and then eventually becomes more to Holland. Or the Netherlands, it's not actually Holland, it's the Netherlands, and ultimately the New World in Brazil and then in the United States. Okay, so this is, again, a very long introduction, but I mean, it's important for me to share the wealth of this period, how important the period was, and the fact that things changed pretty much overnight. In 1 year, from 1 year to the next, things went from a relatively level of comfort to unspeakable pain and unspeakable situations. So, what are we doing with this work, and in particular the Jewish voices from Portugal? So, the genesis of the book is very interesting. When Rabbi Rosenfeld settled in Portugal, and this was like 10, 12 years ago, one of the things that we were talking, I mean, he's originally from New York or Canada, his family, part of it is from Eastern Europe, and one of the things that we figured was, look, you're going to Portugal, we are not going to give to Portuguese Jews and Portuguese people ideas from Judaism and Torah that come from Eastern Europe. I mean, we have to give stuff that comes from Portugal. There is a wealth of stuff, so I mean, let's do the things that resonate with the culture and so forth. And so from that point on, from, again, 10, 12 years ago, we started writing every week a letter, which we started by calling a letter from Lisbon. And what we would do in that letter of Lisbon, it was basically one page, one typed page, where we were basing some discussion of the Torah, passages that were pertinent for that week. But the uniqueness about that was that we were basing those thoughts, those ideas, on the writings of Portuguese rabbis or rabbis that lived in Portugal in the late 1940s and early 1500s, when they were still writing things. So this is the idea, and the book has basically two different parts. Has one first part where we collected some of those essays. So we have 12 years of essays, but I mean we collected basically the equivalent to 2 years of essays. We have maybe 10 or 15 rabbis from Portugal that we considered. We considered in the book just 6 of them, and we end up with something like 110 essays on different aspects of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, again based on the commentaries and the experience of those rabbis. That's the first part. The second part is basically, which actually has to do much more with what I'm talking about today, is biographical notes that are based on original sources. One of the beautiful things about what these rabbis did which is very unique actually in the Jewish world, is when they were writing their commentaries and their sermons and things like that, they would put in the middle of their religious theological dissertations, they would put references there to their personal experience, to what they were going through. So when you look at those documents, you have a lot of information about what they felt, what they were going through, because they use their own words. It's fascinating to see that. So when we put things this way, I'm sort of going back to something that I mentioned in the very beginning. Who are we writing these books? Who are we doing this research, this uncovering of documentation and everything? Who is this for? Well, this is for everyone that is interested in the Iberian experience. It's anyone that is interested in the Sephardic experience. Anyone that is of Portuguese or Iberian or Hispanic heritage, obviously starting with Portuguese, Jewish or not. Because our starting point is that there is an enormous contribution here that is part of our common heritage, and yet most people don't know about it. There is so many beautiful things that have to do with the Jewish memory of what happened in Portugal that people don't know about. People meaning the other Portuguese people. So the first motivation for me, aside from maybe helping inspire my fellow Jews, is to, with the greatest possible enthusiasm, share with my Portuguese compatriots all these stories that bring new light to Portuguese history from Jewish eyes, with Jewish eyes. So it's a unique perspective, but it's part of our common heritage, and we definitely should know about that. I mean, and just to put things in perspective for you, we all think the world, as we should, about the writings and the sermons of Padre António Vieira. Of course, that's a little bit later than these, but we think the world of that. Now, I can tell you something, and I'm not exaggerating. You have dozens of rabbis that are writing at that time, meaning the late 1400s, that are writing sermons that are, from a literary perspective, as good, if not even better, than the work of Padre António Vieira. And I'm talking about, I can name 10, just off the bat. Now, the problem is that they were written in Hebrew, and it's something that is not accessible, so you have to dig them. To find them. So the first part of the book, to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the book. So the first part of the book is again the commentaries on the 5 books of Moses. And as you can see, there are lots of pictures here. One of the things that we did was we were blessed to have a professional photographer who has moved to Portugal recently, well, within a few years back. And his name is Thomas Shire, and he worked to Paris Match magazine in the 60s. He was part of the Israeli group of photographers that took pictures of the 1967 war, and the photos that we see about the Western Wall and the military and blowing the shofar and everything. He was part of that group. So we were blessed with the fact that he was in Portugal, and he accepted to go throughout the country and take pictures of everything we told him that was relevant. And you'll see, I'll share some of the pictures and why they are relevant. And a lot of these is thematically already having to do what the pictures with the themes of the books. So the pictures are all original, developed by Thomas Shire. And again, I cannot say how thankful we are for his work, because, I mean, he is in his late 70s, early 80s, and he spent 2 weeks going all over Portugal, taking pictures, sometimes camping in the middle of night just to take pictures of certain things at night. So he did an incredible job. So the rabbis that we consider, these are the 6 rabbis that we consider here, is Rabbi Yosef Hayun, a great rabbi born in Portugal. Rabbi Itzhak Abravanel, also great rabbi born in Portugal. Rabbi Itzhak Abohab, yet another one. Rabbi Itzhak Caro, he was already born in Spain and he came to Portugal as a refugee. Rabbi Abraham Saba, the same thing, he was born in Spain, he came to Portugal as a refugee. And then finally Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. This is a little bit later, this is already in the middle 1600s, and he was a Portuguese rabbi in Amsterdam, but he was born in Portugal in a new Christian family, and he went to, and this is around incidentally the same time as the Bento Spinoza, all situations and so forth. So if you want to have a historical reference. Incidentally, I'm not going to talk too much about this Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, this last one that is right here, the last one right here, but it's important to mention just to see how important his contributions were as a Portuguese rabbi, a Portuguese Jew that is in Holland. He basically started the first printing presses in Amsterdam, him and his family. And that's why we have this printing press. This picture of the printing press is actually one of the first printing presses in Portugal. That was a Jewish printing press in Leiria. There is a museum there where you can visit. So it's there were made 3 major printing presses in Portugal in this period, all of them Jewish. There were others, but there was the Leiria, Faro, and Lisbon. And again, to give you an idea that also tells you what was going on and the contributions of the Jewish population at the time, we know that the first book to be printed in Portugal was the 5 books of Moses in Hebrew, was printed in Faro. It was printed in Faro in around 1492. That's the first book. It's not the first Hebrew book. It's the first book ever printed in Portugal. Okay? So the first book printed in Lisbon were some commentaries on the Torah in Hebrew. So about 2/3 of the books that were printed in Portugal in the period from in the last decade of the 1400s, so in 1490s, about 2/3 of the book were Hebrew books. Okay? And again, this is well established information, so it's not something that I'm improvising here. So this is a unique set of rabbis, and one of the points that I want to make about them as we move and tell you a little bit of some tidbits about their lives is that if you look at their lives, none of them was able to be born, live, and die in the same place. And this is a time where actually traveling was not that easy. So Rabbi Chayon, he was born in Portugal. He lived in Portugal for quite some time, ended up dying in the Ottoman Empire. Rabbi Abravanel lived in Portugal. He ended up going to Spain as a refugee before all of this happened. And then he ended up dying in Italy, and so forth. And then you have, of course, the other 3 rabbis that were born in Spain. They lived in Portugal after the expulsion, and they ended up, one of them dying in Portugal, the other in the Ottoman Empire, and the other in Italy. So the point is that this is a very interesting measure of how convoluted and how difficult their lives were, because they were just being basically kicked out from one place to another. So, and this is a unique set of commentaries because, again, most of the books that we are dealing with, they are rare. They exist only in Hebrew. So we are looking at original information. And these are books that actually almost invariably were already printed outside Portugal in the early 1500s. And of course, if you ask the question, why is it that we started with these books? The answer is very simple, because this is the first generation of books that is actually printed. There are more books from before. I mean, all the way back to the 1100s, we have manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts in Portugal, from Ceia and from other places. But printed books that survived as such, that were not as perishable, this is the first generation, basically, of books, because the printing press was invented around 1460s. So it made it to Portugal in 1490s, early 1490s, and that's So this is the first generation of printed books. So what I want to do now is just tell you a little bit about three of these rabbis and share with you how their lives were interconnected with the general Portuguese culture and Portuguese history. The case of Rabbi Abravanel is a case, is a very, very, very important case. Rabbi Abravanel is from Portuguese nobility, essentially, Portuguese Jewish nobility, if you want to put it this way. He's actually the only rabbi that I am aware of that is referred to typically by the name Don Abravanel. I don't know about any other rabbi that is referred to as Don something. Okay, so this is Don Abravanel, Rabbi Isaac Abravanel. So he was from, he was born in Lisbon. He was from a family that were very much integrated in the court of King Afonso V. Okay, Rabbi Abravanel was instrumental in a lot of the things that King Afonso V did. For example, we know the contributions of Rabbi Abravanel to the invasion of Arzila. That was one of the, I mean, of course, the nickname of King Afonso V is the African, because he went to North Africa, conquer everything. And again, Rabbi Abravanel was part of that process of financing those and rescuing, not just financing, but also rescuing the prisoners of war that Portugal had left behind. And so he was very close to the king. And it's very interesting because when the king died, King Afonso died, things went sour very fast. Of course, King Afonso was succeeded in the throne by his son, John II. And John II was very insecure about his power. And we know that one of the first things that he did when he became king, King John, was to essentially cut a lot of the privileges of the nobility, which made him not a very popular person, as you can imagine. And there was the understanding at that time, real or otherwise, that the Bragança family being one of the most important noble families in the country, and clearly the wealthiest. So, and they were still relatives of the crown. Of course, the House of Bragança was created with the Aviz dynasty earlier on. So they were all related, and the King John was very much concerned that the Bragança family would take over. They wanted to take over. So the bottom line is that he actually arrested and eventually executed the Duke of Bragança, Fernando, and eventually he confiscated all the goods and the property of the Bragança family. And you ask, why am I telling you this? Well, I'm telling you this because Rabbi Abravanel happened to be very close to the Bragança family. And because he was so close to the Bragança family, he had to flee the country. He had to run away from the country in 1482. Not because of anti-Semitic persecution, but because of political upheaval. He was being accused as being one of the conspirators together with the House of Bragança against the king. So he had to run away. So he ran away 15 years before the expulsion. And he writes in a very moving way. He writes very movingly about his home and his experience in Portugal. So he's saying, and I'm quoting readings from some of his writings. I'm reading from the book. I lived in tranquility, full of God's blessings in Lisbon, a praiseworthy and important city in the Kingdom of Portugal. God blessed me with wealth and honor, and my home was a gathering point for sages and study. 20 years after he left Portugal and he settled eventually in Italy, he is writing, this is his words. It has been 20 years. In my youth, while I was in my homeland, the city of Lisbon, a great city in the Kingdom of Portugal. He speaks so fondly and with so much longing, the Portuguese saudade. He speaks with such saudade, such longing for his homeland. And he also explains that he had to run away from Portugal, he has to leave Portugal. And I want to show you something very interesting here. He says that in 1482, 83, he had to flee Portugal because of these political issues. Again, not anti-Semitism, it's political issues. And he said, he writes, I fled Portugal through the desert. That was his way of saying that he ran away from Portugal through Alentejo, through the southern area of Portugal. And at midnight, in the night with a full moon, I left the kingdom of Portugal and entered the kingdom of Castilla. We know from his descriptions that he ran away through the town of Reguengos de Monsaraz in the southern parts of Portugal. This that you have here, this picture that you have here, for us is a very, very moving picture, because it's a picture of the town of Reguengos de Monsaraz today. Of course, not the same as before, but it's what it looks like today at midnight in a night with a full moon. This is what Rabbi Abravanel describes as being his exit from Portugal at midnight in a night with a full moon. This is Reguengos at midnight with a night of a full moon. And Thomas Shire was kind enough to spend several nights there to be able to take this picture exactly as a reminiscent of what Rabbi Abravanel did. Now, the connection of Rabbi Abravanel with Portuguese and the Bragança, the House of Bragança, and the Portuguese Jewish community in general, there are other things that we've uncovered in more recent time. But one of the things that we did that was fascinating and tells us a lot about these connections is we decided that because of this historical connection, we sent a copy of this book to the Duke of Bragança, so Dom Duarte IX, and the idea being, of course, he is the current holder of the title of the Duke of Bragança. Is of course the apparent heir of the Portuguese throne, if there was such a thing, and Dom Duarte, Duke of Bragança, he replied to us almost immediately, and he says, well, I'm a very good friend of some of the descendants of Rabbi Don Isaac Abravanel. He was a great friend in his times of the Duke of Bragança. I have recently offered to one of his descendants, who is in one of the leaders of the Portuguese Synagogue of New York, the coat of arms of Don Isaac. So apparently the Braganças have given Don Isaac a coat of arms at the time, and he gave the coat of arms of to the descendants that some of them live in New York these days. The thing that is fascinating, that transcends this book, but this is something that we found out recently, reading a book that was printed in Bologna, Italy, in 1538 by a Portuguese rabbi that was refugee at that time in Italy. And he writes something fascinating. Before 1497, this is the Ibn Yahya family. The Ibn Yahya family is one of the most illustrious, arguably the most illustrious rabbinic family in Portugal. They were already the chief rabbis of Dom Afonso Henriques. Okay? It's the Ibn Yahya family. So they were prominent rabbis in around 1495. And at that time, already in the process of negotiations with the King Isabel and Ferdinand, King John, occurred to him something interesting, which was, I'm going to try to convince the patriarch of the family to convert to Christianity, because if he converts, then all the other Jews will convert willingly because he's such an important person. And Don John II, he offered Rabbi Ibn Yahya, he offered him a good part of the land and the privileges and everything that had been stolen and confiscated from the Braganza family. And of course, Rabbi Yehia didn't accept it, and he ran away. And Rabbi Ibn Yehia is saying that, first of all, he would never convert. Certainly, he would not convert for money, and much more so, he would not convert getting the spoils of something that was confiscated, that was stolen somewhat unfairly from the House of Braganza. He would never have that. And how the history twists, how the twists go. He and his family, he fled Portugal because, of course, rejecting conversion, he had to leave. So they actually says, he discusses, 15 branches of his family left in a vessel. They were 5 months in the seas, and eventually they were able to land in Spain, in Castile. And when they got to Castile, of course, this is already after 1492, they were arrested immediately. This is after the expulsion from Spain. Now, this Rabbi Ibn Yehia, he writes, they were saved by the mercy of Don Álvaro de Bragança, who was the brother of Dom Fernando that had been killed by the Portuguese king. And he, Álvaro de Bragança, he was now in Spain as a refugee, as the Abravanels were. And through the connection of the Abravanels and through the connection of Don Álvaro de Bragança, the Ibn Yehias were able to run away from Spain also. They were saved through the intervention of the House of Bragança, again, refugees in Spain at that time. So it's a very fabulous connections. Because we are getting a little bit late, I just want to tell you a little bit more about another rabbi. I'm going to skip this one. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Rabbi Abraham Saba. Rabbi Abraham Saba is a very interesting rabbi. He's one of the most famous rabbis of the time, and we have his commentaries in our book. And he was a great rabbi in Spain. He was expelled from Spain. He moved to Portugal. And when he moved to Portugal, he actually moved to the city of Guimarães. He was given special permission to settle in Guimarães. This is the Castelo in Guimarães. That's basically where he settled. And he was able to bring his library from Spain and develop a big library. And he wrote a lot of commentaries on the Torah while he was in Guimarães for a couple of years. Then he ended up moving to Porto soon after. So in the beginning, he lived in tranquility in both in Guimarães and Porto, but then things, of course, went sour. And he writes movingly that in 1497, by royal decree, my library was confiscated in Oporto, and risking my life, I kept a manuscript of his commentaries that we use in this book. A manuscript with me, with my commentaries on the Torah. And this is my most precious possession, he writes. So, essentially, Rabbi Abraham Saba is in the forefront of everything that happened in Portugal in 1497. Because in the spring of 1497, by royal decree, the children under 14 years old, Jewish children, were kidnapped and converted by force, and that included 2 of his children. So his children were taken away from him, were kidnapped from the family, and were converted by force. And we don't know what happened to them after that at all. And we know that later on in the year, in October, the Jewish population was told to go to Lisbon, where they would get vessels to leave the country, and there were about 30 or 40,000 Jews, in what is now a Praça do Comércio, Terreiro de Paz, in downtown Lisbon, and they were baptized by force publicly, right there. And Rabbi Saba was one of the people that was there as well. And it tells us a little bit about these things. Upon reaching Lisbon, terrifying news spread. Anyone caught with Jewish texts or religious objects would be killed. Outside of Lisbon, together with two fellow Jews, we dug a hole. And underneath an olive tree, I buried my life's work. So his manuscript of his big commentary, he buried under an olive tree. And he says it was a beautiful olive tree, safeguarding my Torah ideas and thoughts. It was a beautiful olive tree, but for me, it was a tree of tears. So these are his words of his own experience. He ended up, this is actually a copy of his book where you have parts that are blackened, that are erased by the censorship about his own experience. So this is a commentary on the Torah, but the parts that are erased are parts where he describes his own life and experience. And of course, on your left here, you have, I'm sure all of you recognize, or most of you recognize, this is the Teatro Dona Maria II. Teatro Dona Maria II, of course, is much more recent than these events, but that is the location where the headquarters of the Inquisition in Portugal was. And that's even before the Inquisition. That is where a lot of the most prominent Jews was in that area that they were arrested. There were some prisons in that area. So it covers basically the back of what is the theater now. And of course, you also know that if you go a little bit to the right in this picture, you will see the place where the massacre of 1506 started. So the work and the words of Rabbi Abraham Saba impressed us enormously. And he basically tells us that this picture, incidentally, is the cover of the book. And he tells us something that is extraordinarily moving. And that is, he tells us that his work that he had written, this is what this Hebrew says right here, is this precious pearl that I had with me was taken away from me in Portugal, as I had to conceal it and bury it in Lisbon under an olive tree. I know that this is an olive tree, but so that you know, this is actually one of the oldest trees in Portugal. But be it as it may. These writings that you have here, these are the original type writings, the original print. This is the original print from the 1523 edition of the book. That is the first printing of his book. And in the first printing of his book, in his introduction, he has these words. So this is exactly, it's taken, it's copied, it's photocopied, it's a picture from the original words, the original type that was used in his book in 1523, again, the first edition of the book. This is a very interesting, very interesting statement, because, of course, I don't expect you to know Hebrew, but again, it says that he buried it in Portugal. Portugal, this is what the word Portugal is. And I actually did a very interesting exercise with my son-in-law, who is Israeli, so he's a native speaker of Hebrew. And I showed him his quote, and I told him to translate it for me. And basically just trying to see how different the Hebrew from that time was from the Hebrew that is being used today. It's not that different at all. And the thing that is interesting is that my son-in-law, he got to all these, and he was able to translate everything without any problem, but there was one word that he was stuck with. And that is this word right here, this word that I'm circling now. And he was stuck with it for a very simple reason, because that word is the word that says Belisbona. Belisbona. That is the name of Lisbon back then. Was Lisbona, was not Lisbon. So this is not the way it's spelled in modern Hebrew, but that's the way it was spelled back then because the name of the city was different. And it's fascinating how, looking at all these books, we find a lot of references to the way things were. Not long time ago, we were looking at a book from around late 1490s, and there was a reference that this rabbi was born in Valença de Caminha. And you say, I don't know, no, Viana de Caminha, I'm sorry, Viana de Caminha. And I'm saying, I don't know what Viana de Caminha is. I know Caminha in the north. I know Viana do Castelo. I don't know what Viana de Caminha is. Maybe this is something silly that they called it a different name. And we started doing research. And we figured that at that time, and actually until the early 1800s, the most important city in the area, the most important population in that northern area of Portugal, was not Viana do Castelo, what is now called Viana do Castelo, was Caminha. And therefore, some of the cities around were called by reference to the most important city, that was Caminha. So Viana de Caminha then changed its name to Viana do Castelo in the early 1800s. But we only figured that out because it was referred to as Viana de Caminha in the writings of that rabbi. So to sort of wrap things up, some parting thoughts. There is a story, a real story of Rabbi Rosenfeld. He was with his children having a meal, and he was sharing with his children this episode that I mentioned to you, that Rabbi Abraham Saba, he buried his book under an olive tree, and that was again a very moving thing, and lots of Portuguese manuscripts were hidden that way, and we know that actually there is records of what all the manuscripts that existed in Portugal, what was done with them. We actually have very clear records of how throughout all the expeditions in North Africa and then in India and so forth, the navigators were selling Jewish manuscripts to the local communities. But again, that's for another conversation. So the idea is that we have this beautiful commentary on the Torah that is hidden under a tree, and the kids, of course, being kids, young kids, they ask, so where is it? And of course, Rabbi Rosenfeld said, we don't know. It was written under a tree, but and he said, okay, so let's go and let's look for it. Of course, these are children. And yet these children were able to capture what we are trying to do. Because what me and Rabbi Rosenfeld are doing, what we are trying to do is, as if it were, going under each olive tree in the country and try to find the hidden Portuguese Jewish treasures. What we are trying to find is the proverbial treasure under this proverbial olive tree. We want to find, wherever it may be, some of the documents we find in British libraries, others we find in the Goethe University in Frankfurt. We have lots of things that we found in the National Library in Israel. But we are looking for all of these documents and literally trying to look underneath every single olive tree and try to find those documents and bring them to life. And the way we look at it as the beautiful expression that is in the Portuguese national anthem, right? It ends with, from the mists of memory, we can hear the voices of our ancestors, right? Entre as brumas da memória, ouvem-se as vozes dos nossos egrégios avós, right? That's pretty much what we are doing. I mean, we are searching through the mists of memory. Now, it's a different memory. It's a Jewish memory, but it's a shared memory. And through the mists of that different memory, we can hear the voices. We want to make heard the voices of our ancestors, our Jewish ancestors. And so this is a book, this is a work of love that is dedicated to them, but it's a work of love that we want to share with all the Portuguese compatriots, to bring from the mists of a different memory the voices of our Jewish ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's this wonderful presentation and sharing of the our common past, our stories, our great minds, our people. Thank you so much. I would like to ask if anyone has questions, or ask the Honorable Consul General if she wants to say a few words.
Yes, I'll be delighted to answer any questions. If you have any questions that you want to answer later on, you can just reach me by email. That's no problem whatsoever. But again, I'll be delighted to answer your questions.
Dr.ª Fátima, passo-lhe a palavra.
Obrigada. Thank you very much. I should say that I was, and I am still, totally delighted to listen to you, not just as a scholar, as a person that is extremely special, and the way that you transmitted this magnificent, how should I say, treasure of the Jewish culture in Portugal. That was, as a, not just as a diplomat and as a representative, but when I was studying by academic training, I'm an historian. So the way you presented it was absolutely amazing. I should commend you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure that it will be clear that it's very easy to be clear, it's very easy to be expressive, because I'm expressing my most profound love for the two components that make me who I am, my Jewish heritage and my Portuguese heritage. And being able to put the two together and share, I consider that as being the privilege of my life. So that's and there is so much beautiful, so much that so much that you can learn from all these stories, how everything fits together. So anyway, that's my passion. So, and of course, I very much appreciate the ability, the opportunity to talk. And I'm also absolutely thrilled that hey, let's not be partisan here. My son Daniel is making statements about Força Sporting Clube Portugal. So let's not be partisan about this. But of course, Daniel, my son Daniel, is fascinating that Sporting seems to be on the verge of winning the national championship. So that proves that miracles exist. Be it as it may. Be it as it may. Sorry?
Rabbi, what made you want to start this? I'm very interested in Jewish Portuguese culture as a Sephardic Jew, but that's, when you speak to most Portuguese people, they're not even aware that there are Jews in Portugal.
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. And look, when people sometimes ask me how do I feel when I'm in Portugal? Well, first of all, I have a thick skin, so it's fine. But I have to tell you that it's a very mixed experience, because I have half of the people that make comments that are not particularly nice, and then they have the other half of the people that want to stop me on the street and take a picture of me because they think I look cute. So, I mean, different in that sense, cute in the sense of different. So it's one of those. It's one of those. But
yeah, some people don't believe you exist. How can you use
yes,
Portuguese?
no, of course. But my point, what I'm trying to do is to tell our our compatriots, our Portuguese compatriots in particular, that there is something I want to share with you. And I want to share with you a part of our common history that you don't know. And it's beautiful. And I want to share it with you, not because I want to give you a hard time. I don't want to talk about all the nasty things that happened then. Unless it's absolutely fundamental to make the framework of things. So that's not my focus. I want to look at the beautiful things that were happening. I want to look at the contributions that these people were making.
Of course.
I want to look at the Abraham Zacuto of the stories. I want to look at all these people that left Portugal and 20, 30 years after, they were still longing to go back. I want to talk about those people that left for generations. They kept in their possession for generations the key of their homes in Portugal after they had to leave.
I don't think people realize the contributions that...
Of course. People don't realize that. That's why I want to share with people, and that's why I'm very, very thrilled that our president understood exactly what we are trying to do and supported in his own way. Just writing a preface to the book, it's more than we could have hoped that he would do. And of course, he understands exactly what we are trying to do. Sorry? I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Então, a Isadora Pompeio saiu por tempo das redes sociais, assim, por essa semana, porque todo mundo estava a criticar ela. E depois...
I muted the microphone. That was...
I could not understand.
It was not a question. But sound says that it wasn't a question, it was a background sound. Sound says that her experience is that the third generation that has lost the connection and has so that inexplicable desire to discover.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's I don't know how to explain, because I mean there are things in life that I don't know how to explain, believe it or not. But it's mind-boggling how generations after all these episodes of 1497, 2 generations, you have people that still identify as Portuguese. If we know a little bit about European history in the middle 50s to the middle 60s, 1600s, I mean to say, 1500s to 1600s, you know that Portuguese in the jargon in Europe was the man of the nation, the Hebrew nation. Being Jew and being Portuguese in Europe of the time were basically synonymous. And that's how the people identified. And you have communities, for example, in Amsterdam, where the Portuguese ended up being, forgive me the expression, a little bit obnoxious, because, for example, if you had somebody that spoke Spanish in the congregation, that was enough to have a very hefty fine, monetary fine. You don't speak Spanish here. We know that in just think about this. We know that in the Portuguese communities in Amsterdam, after 1640, when the Spaniards were kicked out of Portugal, there was celebration there. Do you understand what this means? This is almost 150 years after. And there are celebrations that we got rid of the Spaniards. I mean, there are things that are difficult to understand, but the point is that yes, there is a very deep connection, and most people. I mean, again, all that me and Rabbi Eli, we are trying to do is to bring all this beauty to the forefront, to share it with people. Sorry.
Muito obrigada, Rabbi. Eu tenho que preparar para o sábado. Shalom.
Shalom. Onde é que você está, Ana? Onde é que você está?
Eu estou em Boston.
Boston.
Ok.
Very, very, very nice.
Shabbat alegre.
Muito obrigado.
Adeus.
Very, very good. So, let's see if there are any other questions here. Thank you. Sporting is for hope. Okay, let's not get into soccer. It's one of the things that I go out of the way not to do is to not let anything divide us, and much less soccer. And yes, the recording will be available at the Portuguese Consulate of New York on Facebook and YouTube. If anyone is interested in looking, just see what the books are. They are available on Amazon. You just, or you can ask me, but you can just go there and check it out. Let's see. Very good. So let's see. So the presentation will be online, and we'll have actually a few other presentations as we continue. So on these type of things, I do a lot of speaking about this period in history, and there are a couple of side notes, if you want, to all of these that are absolutely fascinating. For example, one of the things that I talk about is exactly the beginning of the Jewish settlement in the United States. The beginning of the Jewish settlement in the United States is Portuguese refugees, Portuguese Jewish refugees. It's 23 of them that arrive in 1654 in New Amsterdam, which is of course now New York, and it's part of the Portuguese diaspora. There's a whole story, there is a whole beautiful... So when we talk about that very famous saying from Camões, that the Portuguese gave new worlds to the world, right? Portugal deu novos mundos ao mundo. There is a Jewish version of this. The Jewish refugees from Portugal, they brought new worlds to the world. They brought new technologies to the Ottoman Empire. They brought a Jewish presence to America. They brought Judaism to North America, first settlement. And I mean, so there's a beautiful story on that front. The other story that I talk a lot about is of a lady of the family Mendes Benveniste, Dr.ª Nasi. This is from an incredibly wealthy family of new Christians from around the beginning of the 1500s. And for a variety of reasons, she ended up as the leader of the business. They were one of the 6 families that had the monopoly of the pepper and other types of spices from Middle East, from India. And they were incredibly wealthy, and she was uniquely, I mean, in the 1500s, in the early part of 1500s, they have a woman that is the head of a business empire, very unusual. And not only has the head of the business empire, but she actually has an incredible work in terms of helping the Portuguese Jewish refugees throughout Europe, in terms of printing books in Portuguese. There were several books in Portuguese printed in Ferrara in Italy that were sponsored by her, creating businesses already in the Ottoman Empire, in Izmir and other places to welcome Jewish refugees from Portugal, going as far as buying land in Israel, that was, again, at the time under the Ottoman Empire, to settle the Jewish refugees from Portugal. It's an absolutely incredible story. Exactly, that's the woman who defied the kings. That's exactly that lady. It's Dr.ª Nasi, and she was born in Lisbon. She was born right after the 1506 massacres, soon thereafter, and she has an incredible story. And again, she was Portuguese to the core, and she was an incredible business person and an incredible Jewish philanthropist. So we followed her life from Lisbon to London, and then to Antwerp, and then to Ferrara, and then to Ancona, and then to eventually to Istanbul, so to Constantinople. So it's again beautiful stories from Portuguese, that Portuguese aspect, Portuguese Jewish intersection of it. So there is a lot to talk about. Any questions, my friends? Okay, well, if there are no questions, José, maybe you can.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you everyone who attended. I don't know if the Consul General would like to say something before we finish. And
I'm so delighted that I'm almost speechless. I'm extremely moved, as you may have seen.
Yes. So yeah.
Would you, Joseph, would you like to say anything before I hand the word to the rabbi?
Oh, I think you are the person that will finish up with the closing remarks. And I think I talked a lot with the rabbi. Was complaining about this long biography, and he told me that we probably will cut a little bit.
A lot. I'll cut a lot.
Not my fault. Sorry. Trying to apologize.
Well, that's the problem of being old. You know, it's have done a lot of things. Oh, and incidentally, so, and I will use that to conclude, and to one of the things that is not in your bio note, but it's very important, is I'm currently doing work on environmental issues, on carbon taxation directly for the Minister of the Environment. So we are in the process of reforming the carbon taxation, the ISP tax in Portugal. And so there's a lot of work, and I'm, again, as we speak, working on a major project advising the Minister of the Environment.
Do you want me to add it to your bio for the next presentation?
No.
And then I complain and I say, let's gotta get longer and bigger.
No. I'm expecting you to memorize everything.
I'm teasing you. I'm just kidding.
Yep.
Oh, it's my turn to make jokes.
Yes. Very good. So have a blessed evening, and may the love for our common heritage be a light for all of us.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.